To join us, please. Mr. CVL Srinivas, Country Manager at WPP India. Mr. Sandeep Sethi, Division President, Work Dynamics, Asia Pacific at JLL. Mr. Satish Pai, Managing Director, Hindalco Industries. Mr. Vikas Mehta, Executive Director at Set Fund. Mr. Vipul Kumar, Senior Partner at Xynteo. And our moderator, Mridu from CNBC.
You all will have to share. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here today. We are on to our final session of what has been very, very exciting 2 days here at Exchange 2024. And I think this is an opportune time for all of us to kind of reflect on all the wonderful ideas that we've heard since yesterday on this stage. And it's time to dive deep into the heart of this exchange, which is good growth. Growth that is good for people, for the planet, and for, obviously, profits and industry. So in this particular session, I think we would like to know from all of you, how do you ensure that business and sustainability go hand in hand? What is it that you do at the DNA level of the business that ensures that sustainability is never forgotten and never left behind? And Mr. Bhasin made an interesting insight there that, he self-indicted himself, saying that industry needs to do a lot more, and not enough happening from ideas in the boardroom to actually action at the grassroots level. So I'm going to ask each of you for examples of what your respective organizations have been up to. And if I can start with you, Mr. Pai. Hindalco is, of course, a giant in aluminum and copper production. It's been a fantastic year. You partnered with ISRO for Chandrayaan's launch. You were also recognized as the most sustainable aluminum company in the world. So as an organization that champions sustainability, what is it that you do differently? And, what is your secret sauce for really ensuring that you continuously remain a flag bearer of sustainability?
So I think I have to go back to the previous panelist, Pramod, when he said, we started, if you look in the Birla Group, the ESG is a very modern term, but the S part of it was pretty strong for our group for the last 70, 80 years since it's been founded. And that S part was based on the simple fact that we care about the people who work with us, who work around us, and hence the whole ethos of Birlas on putting up schools and temples. And so it's been there in the DNA of the company for a long time. So if you now start to expand and say, if you really care about people, then you start to say, many of the things we are talking about are really for the betterment of people. Better water, better air, better life quality. Today, that whole thing is marketed under the term ESG and sustainability. So I think for us, when I look back at it, it's not that I had to go and say, hey, everyone in Hindalco, there is something here called sustainability. It was more of a natural evolution to say that we do so much CSR work, we do all that, but we now need to do, that's why I call it CSR plus, where you start to now look not just at the things we were doing, but we started to go into water, waste. Carbon was a new concept, and, how do you reduce the carbon footprint? How do you make sure that waste does not go to landfill? And, in Renukut now, I was amazed. They have got a park. They have got a golf course built on top of an old red mud pond. And I didn't tell them to do it. Once people start to believe in something, then actually CEOs should just get out of the way and let people do it. Your job is to make sure that you plant that seed in them, then it'll grow. So I guess that's what we are doing.
Right. That's easier said than done, I must say. But talking about that mindset shift, Sandeep, if I can come to you. At JLL, you are dealing with large corporate clients, especially in the real estate sector, a sector that has been traditional. It's a legacy sector. Most of the enterprises, are many, many years old and have a set way of thinking. So when you deal with leaders from this sector, are you seeing a change in perspective? What has your experience been like? And is there a recognition that each of them has a role to play? And then is there action after that recognition?
Thanks, Mridhu. Before I start, I want to thank Vipul and the entire Xynteo team for doing a phenomenal job in bringing smart minds together. I'm not saying I'm a smart mind, but I'm surrounded by some for sure. I'll respond to your question through a real estate lens, because that's the industry I represent, Mridhu. So short answer, yes. We are seeing a lot of discussions. We are seeing action happening on the ground as well. And, this journey started long back. There was a lot of focus on sustainability. It has been a CXO agenda. It's been on the board agenda for many, many years. But in the last few years, we've just seen companies take it to action a lot more seriously. And unlike what Satish said, not many companies focused on the S part. They probably said the right things, but in spirit, they weren't really driving it to action. Your company was indeed an exception for a very long time. Off late, fortunately, we've been seeing a lot of activity on the S part as well. So ESG holistically is getting a lot of attention. Now, from a real estate perspective, we heard earlier today from Umit as well that 40% of emissions come from real estate. So there's a recognition of the fact. Along with that, there's a larger recognition of the fact that climate risk is financial risk. So CFOs, CEOs are starting to basically put the muscle behind this agenda. What we're starting to see is a lot of this activity started with the low-hanging fruits from a real estate perspective. So every organization that was responsible started focusing on driving energy costs down, looking at how water was being consumed, implemented a lot of projects around water conservation, reusing or recycling water, did the same with waste as well. Off late, they've taken it to the next level by looking at how the kind of offices they occupy, the kind of facilities they occupy. So there's a lot of restructuring of leases. They call them green leases, which means they will insist on the developer or the landlord providing them with green power. They will insist on the landlord to ensure that the office park or the facility is close to a metro station, or there's some element of public transport so that Scope 3 emissions are lower. A lot of organizations have made commitments around net zero. Almost every responsible organization says we've signed up for a net zero pledge. Companies have also said something towards renewable power. Many companies have said 100% of the power they use will be renewable or clean energy sourced. They've done the same thing from a measurement of emission perspective. They've signed up to SBTI type frameworks. So there is a lot of action happening. Now, in the past, we would see this only amongst the large corporates, be it Indian companies or be it large MNCs. But of late, even mid-sized Indian companies are raising their hands and saying, hey, we want to be part of this journey as well, because they have global investors. They compete with the same talent pool with large companies, so they want to come across as a purpose-driven organization. They have global investors and, of course, global clients as well. So there's for the right reason, there's needle movement on that front as well. So answer to your question, Mridhu, yes, we're seeing a lot of actions. Is that enough? Not at all. There's a lot more to be done. but we've started at least seeing the journey moving in the right direction.
Right. So 0 to 1 is definitely happening.
Yeah, on a scale of 10, yeah.
All right. You spoke about market signals. We spoke about intent. Now, the other thing that is critical to the sustainability agenda is, of course, the availability of capital. And Vikas, if I can come to you, India, of course, both India and China will have a pivotal role to play to curb global warming at about 1.5 degrees is what we're talking right now. Now, although India is still amongst the lowest per capita CO2 emission countries, but the size of our population really makes us the third largest emitter of CO2 in the world. And as we go in for more urbanization, more growth, a developing economy, but naturally all of this is going to continue to increase. So one critical lever in this puzzle is that of availability of finance. And I know that said fund is quite uniquely positioned as an integral ecosystem player that really directs efforts in the right direction. So where do you see the biggest levers that need to be actually actioned? And, what are some of the most innovative funding mechanisms that companies can now look at for accelerating their decarbonization journeys?
That's a very heavy question for me, but I'll try and do justice to it. But before I say that, I think I want to acknowledge that thanks for bringing the balance to this panel. Exchange yesterday started off with an all-woman panel, and we're ending today with an all-male panel.
Yes, and I've had the pleasure to moderate both of those. So
yes,
thank
exactly.
You.
You see, as Set Fund, what we have seen over the last 6 years of our journey is that a lot of the capital flows we keep on talking about that should come from the global north to the global south, and which are basically the bane of the bone of contention when it comes to the climate discussion, say the COPs. Every time we look at climate finance, we talk about that, yes, the money should come as some sort of a reparation from the global north to the global south. But the reality is that the geopolitics and the economies on the global north themselves are so challenged right now that expecting them to be able to kind of fund this, pay for the climate change that the global north caused to the global south is probably never going to happen. So we have to look at different sources of capital that can come from around the world into the economies like India, so that we can actually craft our own economic and social journey which can mitigate climate change for us. I also believe that, when you talk about the ecosystem approach, I think it's extremely important to kind of go with that approach by, as philanthropy, we have to work with a wide variety of partners. If we only start to work with the typical nonprofits, the think tanks, and the government, we leave behind a large part of the private sector, a large part of the academia, a large part of civil society. I think it's very important as philanthropies to keep an open mind in terms of working with a wide variety of partners, so that you kind of use those perspectives to kind of bring about the change at the level at it deserves. India is uniquely positioned compared to, say, any other country in the world. We have heard all through the day today that how much of an opportunity it is to kind of, have a renewable energy being a RE champion, be it for manufacturing, be it for distribution, or be it for generation. Hell, we could even create our own electricity market in South Asia, for example. But the reality is that the capital flows are not coming to India as they should. At least we're not seeing at the scale that we had hoped that they would.
Why is that?
Many reasons. Pandemic was one. The second was the Russian invasion of Ukraine that led to a lot of geopolitics around the energy markets. And the cost of capital overall has risen. We have seen inflation play out throughout Europe and throughout the US. I mean, look at what is happening in Argentina. I think all of this makes it a very difficult scenario for new capex to come into countries for new project finance. It's almost impossible right now. So we have to rely on domestic capital. We have to rely on the low-cost capital that philanthropies can provide. And to your question about to what kind of financial instruments or perhaps could work, one way to do it is for philanthropies to come in at the early stage, provides de-risking of some of the larger investments, whether they happen to be from philanthropies to angels to VCs to perhaps the bigger lenders. And then the second way to do this is through some kind of a catalytic capital, which can come in the form of blended finance, which is that philanthropies could perhaps provide some kind of a guarantee, which would be very useful in repurposing some of the older assets. So if you want to kind of say, for example, repurpose a coal plant into, say, a solar plus storage facility, then a blended finance would be very useful for that, and philanthropies can play that initial role to support that.
Right. Okay. So from finance, let me then shift focus to marketing and communication, and that's critical for any project or any sort of initiative that really, takes place. So Srini, from that perspective, how do you see this shaping up? What needs to be done? What role can media and communications and marketing at large play in really driving the sustainability agenda for India 2030? And what are the big opportunity areas that you see right now?
Sure. So let me, hello, check. Let me start with some data points here. Yesterday and today we heard in the panels a lot about behavior change, right? That's probably the single biggest lever we have to drive change. I think the latest IPCC report said this, that by 2050, behavior change alone can reduce carbon emissions by about 40 to 70%. So that's an interesting stat. But then there is research which we ourselves have done as WPP, which says that actually today 60% of consumers globally are very skeptical about, brands and corporates talking about sustainability. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there. And the other piece of data, which is again quite interesting, is, the gap between those who, care about the environment and those who are willing to pay a premium is actually increasing by the year. So while communication and all of that is important, it's obviously responsible communication that one needs to kind of bring to the table. And therefore coming to our role as let's say WPP, to kind of set ourselves up as a responsible communications partner. I mean, firstly, of course, we have to put our own house in order. So like, all other corporates, despite being an advertising and media company, we have our own commitments when it comes to being carbon neutral across our operations by 2025, and in fact across our entire supply chain by 2030, which means all the media partners we deal with and all the content partners, etc. It kind of includes that ecosystem as well. So that was the thing which, of course, put out globally. But closer home in India, while we were setting up the country management structure, which is actually fairly recent, it's about 5 years old, we ensured that, social impact and sustainability is a very key part of our growth agenda in India, which is why we are perhaps the only advertising media company which is part of CNBC in India. So that's kind of got ingrained into our strategy from day one. Apart from that, given that, we employ a lot of creative folk, a lot of the younger folk who are on the one hand very keen to work in these areas, it's also important that we give them the right tools, the right kind of training. So there's a huge emphasis in WPP on training when it comes to green claims, when it comes to, even what kind of clients to work with today and what kind of communication strategies to come up with. And apart from all of this, of course, there's collaboration, which again everyone spoke about yesterday and today. Working with industry bodies and taking this narrative forward, and working with a responsible media partner like CNBC on this show as well. Yeah. Thank
you. But I have a follow-up question on that. There are two schools of thought when it comes to marketing and communication. One is that some companies like to quietly do their work and not really talk about it. And there is another school of thought that if you don't talk about it, you're not setting an example and you're not sort of causing competition in the ESG or sustainable agenda space. What's the WPP philosophy on that?
That's a damn good question. And let me give you a real life example of what we're kind of going through ourselves in our minds. Given that CSR is mandated in India, right, by law, so we as WPP have channelized the CSR investment of all our various agencies into the WPP India CSR Foundation. So we did this, obviously, while we, are in the world of marketing and advertising and all of that. This is one piece of work that we have done over the last 5-6 years, which we haven't spoken about at all, because the important thing for us was to actually get it right. It obviously took a while for us to kind of reach the scale that we have now reached. So today we're working with about 20,000 children from the underprivileged sections of society. We've started to see the needle move in a few areas. Now we believe we need to take the story out, but take the story out for a certain cause, which is we're obviously looking for more funding. We're looking for partners who can come in and add more impact. So I think as long as you define your objectives, you could communicate. But yeah, just shouting from the rooftops before you do anything is obviously detrimental. And that, going back to my earlier point, it's only going to increase that gap.
Right. Right, got that. Well, Vipul, you've heard from everyone here. Xynteo, of course, advises companies on greener and more inclusive pathways for their core business operations. So what do you think are the key levers as we look at India 2030 and we look at a country that really believes and drives good growth? What are those key levers that will really make long-lasting positive impact on the nation?
Thanks, Midhu. I think fundamentally as Xynteo, we believe that business are force for good, a force that can bring positive social and environmental impact. I think the starting point really is how do we find those interventions which work at the intersection. So there is a commercial business model, but there is an intrinsic social and environmental impact that comes out of it. So it's very fundamental because that enables replication and scale, and hence results in transformative impact. In my mind, I think when we work with our partners, 3 key levers that we have learned over the years, which possibly helps us progress our work. One is for us to be able to work with very pioneering businesses and leaders. Businesses who have very intrinsic sustainability in their business strategy, and leaders who are deeply committed in driving change. The second is when businesses recognize that the problems that we're trying to solve cannot be solved alone, and hence the need to collaborate. Collaborate across your value chain, collaborate across even your competition, your partners. It's extremely important that you are able to bring the right set of organization together to find the solution and drive that change. And the third thing is for us to be able to be patient to see the outcomes and the outputs, and have the agency to try and fail and be able to find that one success which is replicated could create the transformative impact.
Right. Well, absolutely. So we've heard a range of solutions, a range of levers that you've all talked about, from market signals to the right financial instruments to champions for the cause, marketing, communication, collaboration. All of this extremely essential to drive the sustainability agenda for India. But now tell us some anecdotes, some examples of this transformative change that you are seeing at the ground level. And Srini, if I can start with you.
Yeah, maybe I can talk about some of the work that is being done generally in the advertising and marketing industry of late. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, talking about sustainability and coming up with all these claims was, frankly, back then perhaps more of a fashion statement and, a bit flaky, if I could call it that. But I think in the last few years, we've actually seen and, corporates and brands really build, purpose and all of this into their very core philosophy, into their products, into their packaging. And hence, the work that's coming out through marketing advertising is also to that extent, I think, a little bit more substantive. Just to give you a few examples, thanks to Xynteo, we worked very closely with Satish's team to create this brand called Kosala. Satish can probably talk more about it. This is to actually help the Weaver community in Chhattisgarh. It was a brand that got created by one of the agencies of WPP. They did fantastic work, and I think it's spun off a decent business with a very noble cause. The other recent piece of work, which of course won a Grand Prix at Cannes, and of course amongst the many awards, it's probably the award we're most proud of last year, was the work we did for Max Flash, the mosquito coil brand. It was actually to do the packaging of the brand, not so much the advertising. The packaging was actually a biodegradable piece, which, when thrown into a dustbin, would kill the mosquito larvae. So the innovation was in the packaging and not the advertising, and of course that campaign by itself did a lot for the brand and so on. So that's another great example. And I think over the years, the kind of work we've been doing for Hindustan Unilever, one of our key clients in India, and again, the shift that we've seen in terms of how purpose is now pretty much coming into the philosophy of the brand. Obviously, the work Ogilvy does for Dove globally and in India, is highly regarded and acclaimed. So yeah, so lots of those examples, and many more, I'm sure, in the future.
And do you track the impact metrics in terms of impact on sales as well? Because you need to show business sense that,
Yes,
that this
absolutely.
advertising makes?
Absolutely. I think it's all interlinked. I think it's no longer one or the other. I think it's both. And I think, like Mr. Bhasin was mentioning on the previous panel very nicely, that at the end of the day, I think all of this has to make business sense. Otherwise, it ends up becoming a one-off, right?
Right. Okay, so let me then come to you, Sandeep. When it comes to the real estate sector, any really transformative success story that you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. I can share many, but let me just take a couple of hours to share some. So I think net zero is a good approach towards the ultimate goal. And it gives everyone a framework. And within net zero, I think most companies are focusing on scope 1, scope 2. Scope 3 hasn't got that level of attention because it's very hard. You have to work with your entire supply chain, your customer base, etc. Within scope 1, scope 2, like I mentioned earlier as well, from a real estate perspective, there's a lot of focus on doing the obvious, saving energy, water conservation, waste, etc. But there's a big element that gets neglected, which is now being addressed, and that's the example I'd like to use or give. There's a lot of focus on operational carbon, which is the carbon that's emitted as a result of the energy you use, for example, lights and all the other equipment, air conditioning, etc. But there's embodied carbon. That's the carbon that sits in the material that's used in construction, cement, steel, aluminum, glass, etc. And that's not addressed because there's very little awareness. And thanks to Xynteo, we now have a coalition in India called Build Ahead that I'm very fortunate to be a part of, thanks to Nitin, who's sitting in the front row. He pulled me in. Build Ahead is a coalition that brings together financiers, cement steel manufacturers, developers, occupiers, and we engage policymakers and other folks in the ecosystem to drive construction towards green cement, green steel, and eventually aluminum, glass, etc. And that is addressing a big chunk of emissions that has been ignored so far. And in the last year and a half or so that this coalition's existed for, we moved the needle significantly. We've driven awareness, we've come up with measurement tools, we've come up with a lot of things that are going to drive the activity in the right direction.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up that theme of collaboration that you just touched upon, coalition and the Build Ahead program. And Satish, if I can come to you, in the heavy metals industry, what is the sort of collaboration that really happens to drive this transformative change towards sustainability, and what are the big gaps that need to be filled for India 2030?
So I think, the industry, I come in from the metal side, and especially if you look at aluminium, the biggest elephant in the room is how can you get energy that is low carbon? Because these are very energy intensive industries. And the second part is the raw material comes from mining. So if you take energy, which comes from coal, and you talk about mining, I guess very often if I go to any social function, I mean, people look at you like you're one of the bad guys coming from, things that destroy. I think that what has happened now is through a lot of effort of the industry, and as well as many people who have taken the initiative, people see this industry. First, they understand the complexities. You have to do the marketing of why you need more aluminium. And when people realize that everything they touch in this world today has got some aluminium in it, they say, okay, but then how do you produce it sustainably? So I think that has needed collaboration. Now, I'll give you one example where we had to work with a company called Greenco. So everyone comes to me in any dinner party and says, Mr. Pai, there's so much solar in India. Why don't you just run your smelter on solar? And they don't realize that solar is there for 6 to 8 hours and we need 24 hours. So we had to collaborate because in India, the battery storage was not economical and pumped hydro became an option. So we worked with a company like Greenco to set up a solar, wind, and a pumped hydro, which then needs to be complemented with our own thermal power to balance out a 24/7 supply. So that's a great example where you have, working with 3 or 4 companies, 2 main ones, to try to decarbonize a hard-to-abate sector like aluminium. And I think that you will have to do a lot more of those. So we were talking to Shell, to Technip, how can you capture carbon, how can you do more with hydrogen. So I think that in general you will have to throw 1,000 darts and maybe 10 of them are going to work out. But you will have to throw 1,000 and do that many pilots if we are going to solve many of these problems.
Right, and large companies can afford to throw 1,000 darts.
I mean, afford is a very good question. I mean, it's not that we don't have shareholders and we don't have to do returns. So we do have that pressure, but I think that if, you know, there is a society pressure as well to show where you stand. So Hindalco is ranked higher in aluminium sustainability than Norsk Hydro and Alcoa, who operate with hydropower. Now that is of some value to us. So it's worth doing it.
Right, and it'll motivate you to keep working hard to stay at the #1 spot as well.
Yes.
Right. Vikas, what about you? In your experience, give us some success stories where you've seen transformative change and, of course, the themes of collaboration and the themes of innovative financial instruments is what we're talking about.
Two quick things. One, Satish gave a fantastic example of as to what you are doing. I think you're absolutely right that when you have to kind of work on transforming these so-called hard-to-abate processes, you have to go with an all-of-the-above approach because one of them will fail, one of them will, you know, be expensive, but then one of them will click, right? So it'll be an experimental path till you find the right process, but you're on the right path. And Sandeep stole my spiel about build ahead, so I won't say anything about it. And I had to thank Nitin as well, so I won't thank him again. That's all right. Moving again. See, Energy Leap is one good example that you saw earlier in the day when we were looking at innovation as being a key element of decarbonization because you have to look at those early stage innovations coming and you have to support them to a certain scale before they can be deployed at the scale of, say, what Hindalco is doing. The second thing, what I would say is that we have supported a lot of the work on the knowledge-based side as well. One of our grantee partners that we have in India, they had been looking at a lot of the generation data that CEA or Central Electricity Authority was putting out. But CEA puts out as a PDF on like a weekly or a monthly basis, and it's not user-friendly for if you want to kind of plan the electricity modeling around that. So we helped them to kind of build a dashboard, which was then taken over by Niti Aayog, and it is now the India Climate and Energy Dashboard, which is really helping a lot of the modelers look at as to how real-time electricity use is happening across all the sources, solar, wind, coal, nuclear, hydro, you name it. And that is really kind of coming together with a lot of planning in real time for the country. And the final bit I would say is that I think we very soon will be coming up with a platform which will be looking at deal syndications between the investors and the developers. We had been working on this previously with EY. I think they are now looking to kind of take it to CII. And the idea would be to kind of how to kind of look at some of the shovel-ready projects which have not been able to kind of get the right investor or investors have not been able to find the pipeline. So doing that matchmaking would be the way forward to actually turbocharge that energy transition. So these are some of the examples that are working for us. But I'm sure that we can, perhaps partner with, any of you in the audience or on the stage to really kind of, give legs to that early stage innovations.
Right. Wonderful to hear that. Vipul, xynteo, of course, works a lot across different sectors. Give us some tangible real-world examples where you've seen really transformative change at the grassroots level. Your favorite success story?
I think you always feel good when your partners speak about some of the success stories that we have jointly been able to achieve, so that's very satisfying. And again, I think if I may kind of quickly borrow the question that you asked Srini, should you be speaking about the work or not? I think my view is we should, but at the right time, not too early. And I'm pretty glad that I think today we can speak about some of the success stories. Of course, Energy Leap is a brilliant initiative in terms of how we help accelerate technology in the green hydrogen ecosystem and how can we kind of really support India's mission on green hydrogen. Of course, we already have multitude of startups who have come on board We're kind of working with them in terms of supporting them, finding them the right industry partners so that we could really help get them commercialized much faster. But I would think that we're just beginning, much more to do there. Of course, again, Build Ahead, in my mind, a phenomenal start we have had over the last 18 months. We have now gotten into a point where we are now very clearly identifying which are the proof points that we want to work on, which then can help galvanize the change. But I think, of course, Vikasa is much longer with, as a coalition over 6 years, and very proud to kind of talk about multitude of successes that we have had. And I think in the morning we heard Rohit speak about the work on plastic circularity very deeply. It's a piece of work that I think we have been able to successfully implement in terms of how you drive behavior change, all the way to ensure that the segregated waste plastic gets collected meaningfully, and then there is a proper monetization of it. So there's a clear business model. And with, of course, I mean, 4 sites up and running, and with the commercial viability absolutely established, I think it's time for us to now look at scaling that up. So that's one very good example in my mind. I think the work which Srini alluded to, which is Kusala, which is a piece of work that we have been doing under Vikasa with Hindalco, is really how do you leverage local resources and skill in driving livelihood. And now we have this whole organization called Kusala, which is kind of really integrated the entire chain from cocoon farming to reeling to weaving to multiple designs to market linkages. And it's getting to a point where it can be self-sustainable. That's another example. I can go on. Of course, kind of we talked about in multiple instances. I think there's another that I just wanted to highlight in terms of how do we help decarbonize last mile transport, and specifically for perishable products. We try to replace the diesel fueled cooling unit in a truck by a technology that can be fully green. We tested that. It's been proven in terms of both commercial viability as well as its emission savings, and something that I'm sure we can find the right pathways to scale. So there are, I mean, I would just pick up these 3 or 4 examples to say, yes, I mean, over the last few years that we have been working, and all of us here are partners in driving this change. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure that when we speak a couple of years down the line, maybe we will be talking about how far have we scaled the work that we established right now.
Yeah, and we wish you good luck with that. So I'm going to give final 30 seconds to each of you to leave us with that one mantra that every business can perhaps incorporate, whether any sector, across scale, across geography, a mantra for driving sustainability along with business operations on a daily basis. What is it that you all live by on a daily basis when it comes to sustainability? Mr. Pai, if we can start with you.
I think at the end of the day, whether anything you do in business, I believe that you have to genuinely believe in what you're doing. And I think that people that work for you very quickly can smell whether you really believe in something or you're just doing something because you have to say it. So I believe that it's sustainability, safety, any of these things as a business leader. If you want your people to actually do it, then you have to believe it and they have to see that you believe it. Then everything will work fine.
All right. Be the change you want to see. What about you?
I would say, just to piggyback into what you just said, Satish, make it real for the entire ecosystem. Sustainability is, of course, a boardroom agenda, but it's got to come beyond the boardroom. So you've got to make it real for all the employees, your entire supply chain. We're actually piloting with a company that puts an app on your phone and that allows you to check your personal emissions. So I have an app that's running on my phone, and it tells me what my emission footprint is. And we want to do that across the entire employee base we have.
How have you fared today?
Today is very good.
Okay.
When I was flying yesterday, it was really bad. But that's how we want to make it real. And it's got to be an inclusive agenda. And it's not just the CEO who owns this. Every person in the ecosystem, including employees in a company that own this. But for that, communication is very important.
Right. Absolutely. Srini?
Well, I think we have a massive opportunity to tap into the energy, the creativity, and the passion of the younger, employee base or the workforce. And this is just a personal learning. I think that's something which probably is underleveraged, generally speaking. And I think giving them the opportunities, giving them the platforms, making them a part of these kind of events, I think will really help.
Do you think they're better brand ambassadors of sustainability than the older generations?
I would think so, because actually today, I must share this statistic. In fact, more than pay packages and all, thank God, one of the questions we're often asked while interviewing youngsters is our own policy on sustainability and inclusion and stuff like that. So it's becoming that important if you have to attract the right talent.
That's very heartening to hear. Vikas?
Whether you believe it or not, climate change is a slow train wreck, and it's the biggest threat that humanity has ever faced. It's also the biggest opportunity that you are facing. And seeing it from that perspective, I would just say that since humans have discovered fire, we've been burning things to kind of get energy. As an investor, as a philanthropist, I think what comes to my mind is that this is a fight between commodities and technology. And if we truly have to look at a certain scale of technology going forward, the costs are only going to come down for technology. And the pace at which this technology have to replace the use of commodities to get the energy is going to determine whether we limit the temperature change to below 1.5 or below 2 degrees or below 3 degrees. Right now, we are on the path to at least 1.75 to 2. Let's hope we can limit it to that itself. That's it.
Vipul, final word.
I can say on behalf of XYNTEO, it's a deep passion to see the change. And every day, whether you win or lose, you only move forward.
With that, it's a wrap of this very, very insightful session. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us today. And a huge round of applause for the incredible work you all are doing together. And I guess we can close this exchange with that thought that Vipul had spoken about earlier. Business can be a force for good. So thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you. Can I please request you all to stay on stage for a few moments?